All right, welcome guys. Welcome all of you. There's a lot of people in this room. We're going to talk about, I guess, Pure and VMware. But before we do that, I maybe talk a little bit about myself. I'm just thinking I've probably met quite a few of you at different Pure events over the last year. You hear my accent. I have a funny American accent. I'm a transplant. I came here from the US a little over a year ago. Been in the business about 20 years. Prior to Pure, I was a customer at Facebook managing global data center ops for the IT team. So we did a lot of VMware deployments, vSAN, all of the above. And then I came over to do solutions engineering in the data center, build out new infra for the solutions lab. So everything Cody ever built in the last 4 years, pretty much was doing stuff for guys like him and Barks. And I moved over here to focus on NewStack, doing containers, automation, and virtualization. So two pretty busy topic areas these days. Definitely exciting areas as well. So today I'm going to talk about these three topics, and I'm going to try to make them, since you guys are partners, I had a real big think. I wanted to make, try and make it relevant to like where you see it and how it would fit in and help you from the Pure perspective. So I'm going to do my best to do that. So to kind of start off as a big part of the VMware solutions world is not having end users have to put things together. Let's see how vendors like Pure can work with VMware to sort of build native products into the platform. So I want to talk about some of the enhancements that's going on, and we'll start with Vsphere7. And that's, a big one for us, I think, is Nvme over Fabric. So let's start with the bottom of the storage stack, so to speak. So many years ago, ESXi was a bottleneck. Or I guess the storage performance bottleneck, if you will, just due to locking mechanisms, how storage was managed and created, how VMs were powered, how data stores and file systems were configured. VMware didn't support a lot of concurrency of how it scaled out across storage. Virtualization wasn't really built for performance apps. So they introduced VAAI to allow more data stores, bigger data stores, sort of faster operations and increased efficiency. So that sort of moved the bottleneck. Think about that. You never really get rid of a bottleneck. You just push it somewhere else. And that's what happened with VAI. So, I think a key point is that with a flash array, it doesn't have a per volume performance limit. It'll give the whole performance of that array to that volume. So, larger, smaller, many data stores. Can you go on mute, whoever's? It doesn't really matter. So it's kind of pushing, we're kind of playing hot potato with that bottleneck. So then, SCSI became that bottleneck at that connectivity layer. So we looked at removing SCSI the SCSI as a backend, and SAS as a backend, and replacing it. SCSI was designed for spinning disks, and the disks got larger, but they didn't get faster. So we sort of went on this journey. We started with NVMe and NVRAM, followed by direct flash modules, turning those SSDs into flash models, which improves density. It removed that SAS layer, gave direct access to the NAND. And then we added the NVMe over Fabric shelves. And then most recently, NVMe over Fabric using ROCE. So up to on the data ports on the front end. Not a huge adoption, right? I think we did it like we launched this at Accelerate 2 and a bit years ago. I think in the beginning it was very limited, like bare metal Linux. So we needed to open it up. We need to work with partners to expand that. So naturally, it made sense to work with VMware because they have a huge part of our customer base. You know, and NVMe offers concurrency. When you talk about SCSI queue depth limits of 32 or 64 concurrent IOs, with NVMe, you're talking about 64,000, which is way more than SCSI was architected for. And it removes a huge barrier. So VMware introduced the Nvme driver, and Pure has introduced this supported feature in our flash array. We've initially released it with RDMA Fabric or using a converged network adapter. And we plan to release it in 6.1 purity. So we're at 6.0 now. The next rev will support it over fiber channel. So configuring it, it might be similar to something you would see with iSCSI. In fact, there's a lot of similarities around how you would configure and deploy it. You'll add some RDMA capable NICs, they're usually 25 gig. And then that process is very similar. You'll bind a VM kernel port to a physical NIC, rinse and repeat for however many NICs you add. And you'll create a software adapter, which is also very similar. The delta or the difference is that with RDMA, you'll have an actual one-to-one relation. So each software adapter will correlate to a physical adapter. And then you can do your dynamic discoveries to discover the storage. Little different, it's an NQN, not an IQN. So, it's built for, large IO workloads, and it performs a lot better. Its general use is to reduce latency. And it's more about large, heavy workloads. And, 7.0 is just the beginning, right? Like this sort of is just the start. And there's a real tight relationship with our engineering and the VMware engineering to really, add features and move this ball forward. So there's a lot that's coming out. I would say this is a .0 release, pretty exciting release, but a lot more to come down the track. So moving on, we'll talk about the next feature is path management. Now, policy-based management was something that was introduced silently in 6.7. So it was a feature that was there and then officially announced in 6.7 update 1. And, a lot of people go, oh, well, why not we just use round robin? Well, round robin is kind of brainless, just kind of forwarding traffic and not doing any decision making. So with this policy-based, we're able to detect latency and look at latency across paths. And when you start to think about things like active cluster, where you might have paths across a WAN and lower latency paths, this starts to come into picture and make a lot of sense from a best practice perspective. And oops, I went too far, didn't I? No. So I mentioned that it was released in 6.7 and 6.7 update 1. And in ESXi 7, we've actually made this our default. So we're, I guess, probably the first vendor to do so. And I think it's worth probably mentioning, we sort of look at best practice as bugs. Excuse me. Our goal within the engineering team at Pure is to find that product, that Pure product and that VMware product, and build them to integrate. So it's, simple deploy out of the box, and you don't have to do a lot of tweaks and tunables to get the best practice. And this is one example of that. Next up, Vsphere Plugin. Now, we've had the HTML5 plugin for some time now. And it's sort of a moving target, an evolving thing. We're constantly adding features into it, trying to enhance it and change it. I think last year we added authentication with Pure 1 into it, so Pure 1 Meta. Some updates to data store provisioning and snapshot management and environment configuring. And then a recent feature was the change to metrics, a busy metric and a capacity full. Now, you guys are probably aware, busy metric is a combination of the front-end workload, data reduction, replication, feature usage, garbage collection, even the modeled array, and all that's pulled into Pure 1, and now it's pushed down to the plugin, so you don't need to go to somewhere else where you can pull this information from that plugin. And then the other one feature added is a fleet registration, similar to the add host cluster wizard that you'd be familiar with when building a VMware cluster, adding ESX hosts. And so we work with the VMware Clarity engineers to follow their best practices on usage, and this is a result of that. And then intelligent provisioning, so it allows you to make storage provisioning or to receive recommendations from Pure 1 around storage provisioning. So it's pulling that Pure 1 metric into VMware when you're making storage provisioning. And then, so this slide is a week old and already outdated because we've already released 4.3.1. But we added some QoS configurations, some volume manager, obviously NVMe support, active cluster, and then Vsphere7. And how do you install it? I think you're probably already familiar with this. It can be installed through the Array GUI and then through a PowerShell CLI plugin. So pretty standard. All right, let's go to VRealize. Now I'm gonna, if there's questions, if you want to flick them into the chat. Otherwise, happy to, when we get to the end of this deck, I'll do a summary and then we can go over any of these areas since I'm gonna throw a whole bunch more stuff at you. So VRealize integrations, you're all familiar with VRealize. So there's four topic area or four product areas that involve VRealize. And Pure has built a certified validated plugin for each one of them. Obviously, Operation Manager and Log Insight, which deals with monitoring and managing and reviewing logs on your flash array, gives you a single pane of glass rather than having to go to another source if this is the customer's choice. And I think the two areas that I will probably that I'll talk more about, which I think will be relevant to you as partners, are around orchestration and automation. Now, VRealize automation tends to be that tool that's very sought after for managed service providers and organizations with multiple customers. Now, VRealize automation offers the ability for a tenant-based solution. So think multiple customers, either externally or internally. And it provides a very granular tool set to be able to publish things to those users. Maybe you have an operations team and you only want them to be able to do certain things, or maybe you have a customer and you only want them to be able to maybe resize a volume, and maybe you only do it during certain times of day. These are things that you can do, and Pure has a plugin-based architecture that makes day one configuration and usage very simple. And with VRealize comes the orchestrator. Now, this is probably, I would say, the real powerful tool that makes automation such an enticing platform. So Orchestrator is a workflow tool where you can build workflows and publish them from everything from storage, networking, spinning up VMs, and really the sky's the limit. It can take REST calls, it can take Python, you can integrate it into Ansible and make Ansible plays and stuff like that. I'd say a couple examples that come to mind. We've got a customer in New South Wales, and they've got an architect that is responsible for building and deploying infrastructure, and he spends an exorbitant amount of time. Says 80% of his time is spent building VMs. And they're a service provider, and they receive requests from the operations team via ServiceNow tickets, and the customer sends that ticket over to, or that request over to this architect, and he's, you know, building virtual machines and building infrastructure, maybe resizing volumes. And they might get that request 400 or 500 times over a 6-month period for the same thing over and over. And so we had a dialogue like, you know, how can we improve this? You know, we're a VMware shop, you know, we have a lot of different processes. And we said, you know, let's investigate Orchestrator for those commonly used tasks. And so they're able to build workflows of those most commonly used tasks and then publish them up to VRealize Automation so that their orchestration team or their infrastructure team could handle those requests without needing to interact with the with that engineer, freeing up a lot more time for that engineer to work on design and architecture-based decisions rather than just routine maintenance. And to take it a step further, you'll look at this list of things we've added. vVol Active Cluster and Pure One Intelligence are the most recent additions to the workflows. To look at the to add a step to that, we have that same operations team could look at storage operations. Say they have a lot of requests from, you know, their customer base to expand volumes or stuff like that. We can publish workflows that leverage Pure One Meta for that storage decision. So rather than relying on an architect or a storage engineer to make a decision, we can give access to these operations engineers the ability to, make changes based on Pure One metadata rather than an engineer, and rather than having an operations person have to make that decision. So they can just push a button or toggle a workflow to initiate it, to again increase the efficiency of that operations team and really save time for them. And these are all very simple processes. You might think of that and go, oh man, that sounds very complex. That sounds very difficult. When you deploy Orchestrator, there's these functions are deployed via plugin. So you can install the Pure plugin, which is a free download from the VMware website. And it comes with over 100 workflows of like the most common used processes, like connecting ESXi to the array and resizing a volume and restoring a virtual machine and things like that. So a lot of stuff's already built for you. So you can publish those real easily and give people access. And then with the automation tool, be very granular about who has access, even when they have access. Making it a super powerful tool. And then the neat thing about it.
Andy, you just read my mind. I was going to ask how hard was it to implement and how much time do you spend to customize and so on?
That I answered it, you said?
Yeah, it's pretty much good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's a super powerful and pretty simple to deploy. I mean, I'd probably say the deploying the OVA part is probably the harder part than the plugins and stuff like that. And it's pretty intuitive. And the neat thing about it is it's very modular. Like I said before, you can integrate it into infrastructure as code frameworks, and like PowerShell and Python and all these things. But it also is a tool that you can build and develop for any customer, any organization. So an orchestration developer could build things for vCenter, obviously for VRealize Automation, for vCloud Director and VCF, and VRealize Cloud Automation, making it a sort of a central tool that can publish to all of them. So it can publish to all of the VMware estate, making it a very powerful tool. And why that's important is if I were to go and draw the similarities between, how maybe an open source developer or a software developer might do it, they might have different tooling for different processes, right? You might have a PowerShell script to do this. You might have an Ansible playbook to provision. You might have a Python playbook to provision a switch. VRealize can pull all that stuff into it, and you can create that workflow for everything in one place. Now, I reckon Tesla's probably talked in length to you all about Pure One Analytics, so I won't spend a ton of time on it. I will tell you, we have added vVol support to it, and we do find actually, and it does include third-party array support. So your Pure customer that has a flash array and maybe other arrays can deploy one of our collectors that will send vSphere metrics up to Pure One and allow them to use Pure One to look at source or target to destination latency and performance from every volume in their VMware environment to every VM. So not just flash array, but anything else, anything. And I'd say the most people that I talk to find it, they don't look at it all the time. They look at it when they have a problem and they want a real easy drill downable way to look at latency and performance on each individual item. And they found it super useful. So. All right, so we're on the last topic. I think I've got, I'm actually doing probably pretty good on time. We'll see how much time I burn through this. I was actually going back and forth on VCF because there's a gazillion things to talk about here, and you could boil the ocean, and I was trying to do that and beating my head up against the wall, trying to figure out how to not do that. And there's an area that I want to talk about before I get into vCloud Foundation. It's just a new thing that we've released just to partners, and that's Smart Config. A Smart Config basically simplifies flash stack deployment. And it's a tool that we built in solutions engineering at Pure in correlation with Cisco that really simplifies the deployment of flash stack. It breaks it down into sort of 4 pieces where, after you rack and stack, you discover, configure, initialize, and deploy. What it does is it takes that CVD and that VVD best practice guides, and it rolls it all into it. So you're left with an easy to use, rinse and repeat templated deployment tool for building these flash stacks. So for partners that are actually delivering the kit, providing professional services to rack and stack and deploy, the really neat thing is, while a flash stack deployment is super sophisticated, right? There's a million ways to rack and cable it, and then to configure it with service profiles and zoning and storage and all that stuff. We have this tool can greatly simplify that process and allow you to have a templated, scripted process that even an operation, maybe a junior administrator, can follow and build end to end to deliver all the way up to ESXi, ready to deploy VCF on top of. And I think this next slide, actually, so that's all I'm going to talk about. Smart Config. We can have more deep dive sessions down the road. I'm sure Alex and Lawrence will probably be doing that. So to jump into VVD, VVD was launched at VMworld 2015 to sort of ease use of customer deployment and management for an SDDC. Now this slide is representative. This is the actual VVD architecture that we built in the engineering lab back in 2017 to certify with VMware. We initially started with, on the left side of the page, a single site, and then onto a multi-site. So UCS, a spine and leaf architecture. So when it first came out, I think IBM and Accenture were the two partners, are the two GDM go-to-market partners, and Pure was the storage partner. So they actually Accenture actually came to Pure and said, hey, we want to sell this VVD. Will you guys go through this process with us? And we're like, well, sure, what do you mean? They're like, well, we need you to build it and certify it with VMware. So we had to go out and borrow all this kit from various teams, from Cisco, because we didn't have a bunch of 9Ks and all this stuff just laying around, and then actually build it, and then work with VMware. It was about a 6-month process from end to end, where we built their entire architecture of the SDDC and to their constraints. And then we certified that at, I think it was in, I want to say August 2017 with VVD4, and then we just released 5 a couple weeks ago. And I think the reason I bring that up, that whole story is, this was a partner that came to us and said, hey, can you guys do this? And it's going to help us to sell more Pure, but we really want to sell this product. We want to sell this SDDC. And we went, yeah, let's do it. Let's build it. And then since then, it's just developed into a great relationship with both Accenture and with VMware. Really, just more and more solutions has been built, as you've seen. So what is SDDC Manager? It manages the bringing up of Cloud Foundation, creates and manages workload domains. It performs lifecycle management, which is essentially, managing the lifecycle of those ESX hosts, patching, updates, stuff like that. And then what's Cloud Foundation, which is the commercializing of it. It's basically, it brings all of this stuff together, vSphere, SRM, the VRealize Suite, the replication, NSX, into a certified, validated product that's gives you a single pane of glass for both public cloud and private cloud, and managing and monitoring of all the pieces. And it's sort of I don't want to say easy to use, but a fairly easy to use platform. And I guess I'll iterate that single pane of glass. And from a Pure perspective, so VCF introduces a thing called domains. So we build going back to that one slide, the Smart Config builds everything up to allow you to have start out with that management domain, which includes like all the VRealize Suite and the SRM and the vCenters and stuff like that. And then it gives you a function of workload domains. Now, one thing when this originally came out, it was a vCen only tool. And VMware has realized that, they came to us and said, look, 70% of our customers are on fiber channel virtual machines. And so it's important for us to work with our partners from a storage perspective to allow and enable our customers to consume VCF and leverage, their storage vendors of choice. So they've opened that up to allow storage vendors like Pure to be able to function with that workload domain. Those workload domain, you could look at it like a silo of cluster of ESX hosts. You might have different workload domains for database, VDI, stuff like that. And originally it was a bit siloed because you had a vSAN cluster. So you were sort of constrained to the mobility of them. Maybe you built a workload domain and it shrunk, the usage shrunk, and you wanted to move it. And it became really hard to collapse that infrastructure from a storage perspective. So by decoupling storage, we're able to, leverage all those features of performance and resiliency and uptime and dedupe and compression from a flash array. And we're able to present that to all of these workload domains. And still have the ability to shift, compute where adequate. So if we need to resize and stuff like that. And that's it.